The hall of the Galactic Council was one of the largest meeting chambers in known space. It was built to impress visitors, with tall glowing pillars, layered balconies, and walls that shifted colors with every motion inside the room. Delegates from many worlds gathered there, each carrying the pride of their own species. Yet on this day, even the grand hall felt strangely small. Everyone sensed something important was about to happen. The human delegation entered quietly. They did not march or try to draw attention. They simply walked in with calm expressions, taking their seats without a single wasted movement. Their presence always had a strange effect on the room. Humans were not the oldest species. They were not the most powerful. They were not the wealthiest or the most technologically advanced. But there was something about them, something steady, something confident that made others sit up a little straighter whenever they appeared. Today, the council planned to push them into accepting a new treaty. The treaty had been designed by a handful of influential council members who believed humanity was becoming too independent. These members thought humans needed to be reminded of their place. They wanted restrictions, tighter controls, and limitations on how many colonies humans could build. They believed humanity would accept anything if enough pressure was applied. The meeting began with the usual formalities. Voices echoed through the vast chamber as the council speaker introduced the agenda. The human representatives listened politely, their expressions unreadable. They showed no sign of the frustration that had been growing for weeks. They waited until the council revealed the proposed treaty. When the treaty document appeared as a hologram in the air, the room went silent. It detailed strict limitations placed only on humans' limits on trade, fleet size, and new settlements. No other species faced the same restrictions. Even the way the document was written felt insulting, as if the humans were being treated like an inexperienced group that needed supervision. Many delegates watched closely to see how the humans would react. Some expected anger. Others expected loud objections or a long argument. Instead, the human delegation simply read the document in silence. They scanned each line carefully, sharing a few glances with one another. There was no shouting, no frowning, not even a deep sigh. After several long moments, the lead human representative stood up. The rest followed. They did not argue. They did not explain. They simply said, in a calm and steady voice, "We decline." Then they turned and walked away. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the chamber. It was not loud, but every step felt heavier than the last. The council members stared, unsure of what they had just seen. None of them had expected the humans to leave so quickly, and certainly not so quietly. A few tried to call after them, but the humans did not pause. They continued walking until the doors closed behind them. The silence that followed was worse than any shouting match could have been. Delegates from nearby seats exchanged nervous looks. Some whispered to each other. A few leaned forward, trying to understand what had just happened. The council speaker tried to regain control of the room, but his voice sounded weaker than usual. One delegate, from a small aquatic species, spoke up first. "They did not even try to negotiate," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Humans always negotiate. Why leave like that?" Another delegate, from a tall insectoid race, clicked his mandibles in worry. "Because they made their decision before entering the room," he said. This was not a reaction. This was a message. More whispers spread across the hall. Some species understood humanity better than others. Those who had worked with humans knew they rarely acted without thinking. If they walked away, it meant they had already reached the point of no return long before the meeting began. A representative from a peaceful desert world leaned forward and spoke in a low tone. "You pushed them too far. You thought they would accept anything to keep the peace. But you forget who they are. Humans are calm until something crosses a line they cannot ignore." One of the council members responsible for the treaty waved his hands in frustration. We simply offered terms to keep them from expanding too fast. That is not unreasonable. A deep voice answered from the opposite balcony. You did not offer terms, the delegate said. You issued an ultimatum. And they know it. The council speaker tried again to bring order. Let us not overreact. The humans will return. They have always returned in the past. But even he did not sound convinced. Several species had seen this pattern before, not with humans, but with their own histories. Walking away without anger was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign of firm resolve. It meant the humans did not see the point in arguing anymore. It meant the council had not only crossed a line, but had kept walking long after. The room's tension grew thicker as more voices joined the discussion. Some were concerned. Some were frustrated. A few even felt fear, though none said it directly. Humans had a reputation for unpredictability, but it was a certain kind of unpredictability. They were the type who would endure hardship, negotiate peacefully, and work with others. But if they felt betrayed or disrespected, they changed course immediately. One delegate tried to lighten the mood. They are only humans, he said with a small laugh. But the laugh faded quickly when he noticed the reactions around him. A few species looked at him with disbelief. One representative shook his head slowly. They are only humans, he repeated. Tell that to the pirates who tried to raid their early colonies. Tell that to the warlords who underestimated them. Humans do not start trouble, but they have ended many situations that others thought were unmanageable. The delegate who had tried to joke about humans lowered his gaze. On the far side of the hall, a younger representative spoke softly but clearly. What if they never come back? She asked. What if this time is different? No one had an answer. The council speaker tried one more time to regain control of the situation, but now his voice was drowned out by quiet conversations. The room felt unsettled, as if the temperature had dropped. Every species could feel that the balance of the galaxy had shifted by the simple act of humans standing up and walking out. What made the moment even more powerful was how calm the humans had been. They had not shouted or argued. They had not accused anyone. They had not made a scene. They simply removed themselves from a situation they found unacceptable. That quiet exit unsettled the council far more than any heated argument could have. Some delegates began reviewing old reports. They looked at how humans responded to unfair treatment in the past, how they valued respect, and how they reacted when someone crossed their boundaries. Old warnings suddenly made sense. Species who had worked with humans before had always said the same thing. Treat them fairly, and they will stand with you. Treat them unfairly, and they will walk away without looking back. Inside the chamber, more and more delegates realized the same truth. They had misread the humans. They had mistaken calm for weakness and cooperation for obedience. They had treated humanity like a younger species that could be guided with pressure. Instead, they had pushed away one of the most determined and resilient civilizations in the galaxy. When the meeting finally ended, the room emptied slowly. Delegates left in groups, talking quietly among themselves. Many of them were already making private notes, preparing to send messages back to their home worlds. Everyone wanted to avoid being caught off guard. Everyone wanted to know what the humans would do next. And although no one said it out loud, a quiet understanding moved through the galaxy that day. The humans had walked away, but that was not the end. It was only the beginning of consequences the council had never considered. The humans left the grand hall of the Galactic Council without a single word beyond their refusal. Their quiet exit sent ripples through the galaxy that could not be ignored. Even as they moved away from the station, their ships glided smoothly through space, showing no signs of urgency or panic. It was as if their calm confidence alone was enough to command attention. But the council remained behind, confused and uneasy. struggling to understand what had just happened. Inside the council chambers, whispers spread quickly. Delegates from multiple worlds crowded together, speaking in low tones. They debated endlessly, trying to guess what the humans were planning. Some were worried. Others were frustrated, and a few admitted quietly that they had underestimated humanity all along. It was clear to many that the humans' departure was not an empty gesture. Every species knew that walking away without a fight was unusual for anyone, but for humans, it was a statement. It was not just rejection. It was a warning that demanded attention. Outside the chambers, the human delegation returned to their fleet docked near the station. The ships were sleek and practical, built for efficiency rather than display. Yet they carried a quiet presence that felt heavier than the Council's largest warships. Within hours, humans began strategic movements across nearby sectors. They adjusted trade routes, communicated privately with allied species, and prepared for contingencies. Every action seemed calculated, yet effortless. It was a reminder that humans did not act without purpose. News of the human withdrawal spread quickly. Traders, diplomats, and smaller species began contacting humans directly, seeking clarification. They wanted to understand the situation, fearing the Council's instability might affect their own worlds. Humans responded politely but firmly, making it clear that no one would negotiate under disrespectful conditions. The message was simple, but it carried weight. They would deal with those who acted honorably and would not waste time with those who had not. Meanwhile, the Council grew increasingly restless. The member species who had initially pushed the treaty felt a mix of anger and panic. They had expected humans to argue, to negotiate, or even to make concessions at the last moment. Instead, humans had done the unexpected. They walked away and left the Council scrambling to repair its own reputation. This was a level of confidence that few species could match. They realized that humans were not just strong. They were aware, patient, and wise enough to avoid being drawn into traps. As the hours turned into days, more Council delegates began to notice the consequences of their miscalculation. Trade shipments between planets were delayed because human allies had chosen to review their agreements carefully. Military patrols, previously coordinated with the Council, were being temporarily reassessed. Some independent worlds quietly began aligning with humanity, signaling their trust in humans over the Council. It was a subtle shift at first, but the change in influence was undeniable. Humanity's absence at the table was felt immediately. Back in their command center, the human delegation observed these developments carefully. They did not rush or act out of anger. They had learned long ago that patience and careful observation could achieve more than impulsive action. They sent messages only when necessary, encouraging dialogue with smaller species, strengthening bonds, and showing that they would protect the integrity of interstellar relations without compromise. Their approach was precise but calm, letting actions speak louder than words. Across the galaxy, the Council began to fracture internally. Smaller species started questioning the judgment of the more influential members who had pushed the treaty. They began asking if the Council had overstepped its authority and whether it was wise to alienate humans. These questions, once whispered quietly in corridors, grew louder with each passing day. Even some of the Council's own military leaders wondered if the humans' quiet warning might be the beginning of larger consequences. Reports started arriving that some species were quietly building trade agreements with human colonies, bypassing the Council entirely. The Council had underestimated the reach and influence of humans, assuming that distance and isolation would prevent immediate impact. But humans had spent decades carefully building relationships, ensuring that trust and respect were their strongest assets. Even without confrontation, their presence was felt across sectors far beyond the immediate borders of their colonies. Inside the Council chambers, debates grew heated. Members argued over the correct response, Some urged patience, believing that humans would eventually return if the council softened its approach. Others argued for immediate action, suggesting they should demonstrate power to remind humans who controlled the negotiation process. But every voice in the chamber was aware, deep down, that direct confrontation could backfire. The humans had shown restraint, but that restraint was not weakness. They had acted deliberately, and that deliberate behavior carried consequences no one fully understood. Meanwhile, humans continued quietly strengthening alliances with smaller civilizations. They sent envoys to distant planets, offering support, technology exchanges, and trade agreements. These efforts were framed as collaboration, not dominance, and their sincerity was evident. Other species, even those previously loyal to the Council, began to see humanity as a stabilizing force, someone who could mediate disputes, support growth, and provide security without unnecessary interference. The perception of humans as a dependable force spread rapidly. It was during these days that the Council began to understand a truth they had long ignored. Humans did not act out of ego, nor did they seek power for its own sake. Humans acted with purpose, guided by principles that combined patience, fairness, and strategic thinking. Their calm departure from the negotiation table had been a lesson in itself. The Council realized that they had treated humans like another species that could be bullied or intimidated. But in reality, humans had quietly observed, calculated, and acted only when necessary. The pressure inside the Council became almost unbearable. Each day, new reports arrived of species questioning Council decisions, of trade routes shifting, and of communication networks opening directly with humans. The balance of power had shifted without a single battle being fought. Humans had achieved influence through patience and resolve, without raising weapons, without threats, without even raising their voices. Their quiet confidence had done more than any military demonstration could. The Council members who had proposed the treaty began to recognize their error. They had assumed humans would bend under pressure, that a show of authority would be enough to force compliance. They had not accounted for the human sense of respect and fairness, for their refusal to negotiate under insult, or for their patient intelligence. As the reality of the situation sank in, even the strongest voices in favor of confrontation began to reconsider. They understood now that the humans had a strength that could not be measured in fleets, treaties, or speeches. It came from character, unity, and an unshakable calm that demanded respect. Outside the Council chambers, the galaxy continued to shift. Species who had quietly observed the human response began to reconsider their own positions. Some sent envoys to humans seeking advice and assistance. Others reconsidered previous alliances, questioning whether they should continue to rely solely on the Council's guidance. It was a subtle but powerful ripple effect, one that began reshaping interstellar relationships without a single conflict. Humans, meanwhile, did not celebrate or gloat. They continued with their work quietly and efficiently, observing, planning, and maintaining communication with trusted allies. They did not seek to punish or dominate. They only acted where necessary to ensure respect, fairness, and the stability of the regions they cared about. That simple, consistent approach made humans even more formidable in the eyes of the galaxy. By the end of the second week after the human withdrawal, it was clear that the Council had miscalculated badly. What had been intended as a simple negotiation tactic had become a warning to the entire galaxy. Underestimate humans at your own risk. The humans had not attacked, threatened, or demanded anything. They had simply refused to participate under unfair conditions. And their actions had caused consequences far greater than anyone had anticipated. The Council finally began to realize the full meaning of the humans' quiet refusal. They had underestimated patience, underestimated intelligence, and underestimated the quiet power of calm confidence. They had assumed humans could be pressured, but they now understood that humans chose the terms on which they acted. The realization spread slowly through the council, accompanied by a growing sense of respect and fear that humans were not just another species to negotiate with. They were a force to be understood, valued, and respected. By the end of this period, one thing was certain: the galaxy had changed. Humans had reminded everyone that power was not always measured by fleets or decrees, but by the combination of patience, unity, intelligence, and quiet confidence. They had walked away from the table, but in doing so, they had drawn the attention and respect of countless civilizations. The council now faced the uncomfortable truth that they had not only misjudged humanity, they had underestimated the consequences of doing so. After the humans left the Galactic Council chambers, the effects of their decision rippled across multiple star systems. It was as if the galaxy itself had paused for a moment, holding its breath. Reports came in from planets far beyond the Council station that humans were quietly but deliberately repositioning their fleets. Not for attack, not for intimidation, but to safeguard their colonies and trade routes. Every movement was precise, showing a careful balance of caution and strategy. The humans were not reacting emotionally. They were observing, planning, and preparing in ways that few species could fully understand. The news of the human withdrawal spread quickly. Traders, diplomats, and smaller worlds began reaching out directly to the humans for clarity. "What will you do now?" some asked. "Should we stay aligned with the Council?" Others sought to offer support, sensing that the humans' refusal had highlighted the Council's arrogance. Humans responded with measured calmness. They did not insult, argue, or boast. Their messages were firm yet fair. They would work with anyone who respected them, and they would not waste time with those who did not. That simple approach carried a weight that few species could ignore. Back at the Council chambers, chaos quietly set in. Delegates whispered nervously, trying to figure out what had happened. Some argued among themselves, trying to place blame for the miscalculation. Others began reviewing old reports, realizing they had underestimated the humans' ability to influence the galaxy without confrontation. Every day, more reports arrived of smaller civilizations quietly building alliances with humans, bypassing the Council's authority. The humans' influence was spreading, not through coercion, but through trust and careful diplomacy. Even within the Council's own ranks, doubt began to grow. The members who had pushed for the harsh treaty found themselves questioning every step they had taken. They had believed that humans would submit, but now it was clear they had misjudged them. The humans had walked away from the negotiation table, but in doing so, they had sent a message that was stronger than any speech, stronger than any threat. Their calm confidence reminded everyone that humans did not act out of fear or impulse. They acted out of purpose, guided by principles and clear judgment. Meanwhile, humans did not waste time. While some species panicked, humans quietly strengthened relationships with their allies. They sent envoys to distant colonies, worked on trade agreements, and ensured that communication lines remained open. Each move was deliberate. They did not act recklessly or in anger. They showed that humans could achieve influence not through force, but through reasoned action, respect, and careful planning. Their calm approach made their power feel understated yet undeniable. The Council began to feel the pressure of the humans' absence. Trade routes that had previously been stable became uncertain. Some worlds hesitated to follow Council orders without confirmation from human representatives. The balance of influence in several sectors began to shift subtly, and the Council could not ignore it. Delegates started receiving messages from planets that had previously been loyal to the Council, asking questions, seeking advice, or directly requesting communication with human officials. The humans' simple act of walking away had unexpectedly created both doubt and dependency among other species. Within the Council, arguments became more intense. Some members insisted that humans would eventually return if the council softened its stance. Others argued for immediate measures to remind humans of the council's authority. But even those advocating for action understood that the humans' calm response was not a weakness. It was a deliberate message that the council had underestimated. Any misstep could make the situation far worse. The humans had shown patience and restraint, qualities that could not be ignored or challenged without risk. Meanwhile, human colonies were quietly reinforcing their infrastructure. They focused on ensuring the safety and well-being of their citizens, improving communication networks, and maintaining trade and resource distribution. Their presence was increasingly felt across multiple sectors, not because of aggressive action, but because humans had always built trust and reliability. They had spent decades establishing themselves as dependable partners. And now the council realized that removing them from negotiation or disrespecting them had consequences that extended far beyond immediate treaties. Some smaller species, who had long felt dominated by the council, began to see humans as a stabilizing force. They quietly reached out, asking for guidance or assistance in maintaining peace and prosperity within their own territories. Humans responded without judgment or superiority, offering advice and collaboration. Their calm, fair, and strategic approach made humans appear wise and dependable. And species who had never spoken with humans before now looked to them as a model of principled action. Back at the council chambers, the sense of urgency increased. Delegates who had once been confident in their decisions now questioned their judgment. The humans' refusal to engage under unfair terms had not been aggressive, yet it had sparked a crisis of confidence. Some members attempted to negotiate behind the scenes, sending messages to colonies and allies, hoping to clarify intentions or regain influence. But the humans had already made their position clear. Respect, fairness, and principle would guide any future engagement. As days turned into weeks, the ripple effects grew more pronounced. Trade agreements shifted toward humans. Some independent systems began consulting them on interstellar conflicts. Other species saw that humans were not acting to dominate, but to stabilize, protect, and maintain fairness. That quiet strength became more influential than any fleet or weapon. The humans had made it clear that influence could be achieved through trust, wisdom, and careful strategy rather than through force or intimidation. Inside the council chambers, realization began to take hold. Humans were not just independent, they were patient, capable, and principled. The council had assumed they could be pressured, misled, or manipulated, but the humans had proven that patience and clear judgment could achieve far more than threats or ultimatums ever could. Their refusal to participate under insult had demonstrated a quieted, deliberate power that demanded attention and respect. Meanwhile, humans continued to focus on their core values. They strengthened bonds with allies, ensured that resources and infrastructure were secure, and kept communication channels open. They did not seek revenge or dominance. They acted with foresight, showing that humans could shape events through careful planning, strategic patience, and ethical behavior. Their actions reminded the galaxy that strength was not only in weapons or numbers, but also in wisdom, unity, and calm confidence. The Council could no longer ignore the growing influence of humanity. Smaller species that had been silent observers now acted in favor of humans. Messages arrived almost daily, requesting guidance, assistance, and even partnership. Humans responded with a steady hand, building relationships based on trust and mutual respect. Their approach demonstrated a form of leadership that was principled and deliberate, not coercive or forceful. The humans' quiet influence began to overshadow the Council's authority in subtle but powerful ways. By the end of Part 3, one truth became evident. Humans had changed the galaxy without firing a single shot. Their calm, deliberate actions, refusal to accept unfair conditions, and steady focus on fairness and respect had created a shift in influence that could not be ignored. The Council now understood that underestimating humans was a mistake they could not afford to repeat. Humans had shown that strength was not just measured by power or force, but by patience, wisdom, and integrity. The weeks following the human withdrawal from the Galactic Council, meetings revealed a galaxy slowly awakening to a new reality. The humans had not threatened, not attacked, and not shouted. Yet their absence alone caused ripples that spread faster than any military fleet. Smaller worlds began quietly questioning the Council's authority. They had seen how the humans had walked away calmly, and it made them wonder whether the Council's decisions had truly been in everyone's best interest. Back on human colonies, life continued with quiet efficiency. Humans did not gloat over the Council's discomfort. They focused on their communities, ensuring trade networks remained smooth, infrastructure stayed intact, and communications continued with distant allies. Yet beneath this calm routine was careful observation. Every report from the Council, every message from neighboring species, and every shift in interstellar trade routes was noted and analyzed. Humans were learning about the galaxy, its hidden tensions, and its vulnerabilities, but always with patience and clarity. The Council, meanwhile, began to sense that it had made a serious mistake. Leaders who had initially demanded the treaty now held private meetings, admitting to one another that their understanding of humans had been flawed. They had thought humans could be pressured, bullied, or controlled, but they had misread patience for weakness and calm for submission. What they had underestimated was humanity's principle-driven mindset. Humans acted not out of impulse, but with measured, deliberate thought. Walking away from the Council chamber had been their message, a demonstration of strength that required no words or weapons. Across multiple star systems, the humans' careful approach began to influence other civilizations. Smaller species that had long felt constrained by Council mandates started reaching out to humans. They sought advice, guidance, and support. They wanted to know how humans balanced power, fairness, and growth. Humans responded without arrogance. They offered solutions based on experience, cooperation, and shared benefit. Every action reinforced the idea that humans were reliable, fair, and patient, but also firm when principles were at stake. The Council grew increasingly uneasy. Reports reached them almost daily of systems realigning loyalties, trade networks bypassing Council control, and independent planets quietly adopting human standards for fairness and cooperation. The humans had not imposed themselves, but they had created a gravitational pull of influence, a quiet power that was impossible to ignore. Even those Council members who had long considered humans as insignificant were now forced to reconsider. Inside the Council chambers, the atmosphere shifted. Delegates whispered about the implications of humanity's actions. Some argued for diplomacy, suggesting that the Council should issue apologies or attempt to repair the relationship. Others, more prideful, wanted to assert control, worried that allowing humans to gain influence without confrontation would weaken the Council's authority. But deep down, even the most aggressive members felt hesitation. Humans had shown a kind of resolve and foresight that few species could match. Acting hastily against them could create far greater consequences than the Council had anticipated. Meanwhile, human colonies continued their quiet work. They strengthened defenses, not as a threat, but as preparation. They expanded communication networks to better coordinate trade and information sharing with allies. They ensured that supplies and resources reached all colonies efficiently. Every action demonstrated organization, reliability, and foresight. Humans did not flaunt power, but their effectiveness became increasingly evident. Other species began to recognize that humans were a force that brought stability and trust wherever they engaged. The influence of humans extended beyond logistics and trade. Their actions began inspiring smaller species to question the Council's mandates and to think independently. For centuries, the Council had been seen as the ultimate authority in interstellar affairs, but the humans' calm, principled stand challenged that perception. Species that had never considered themselves leaders now started to think about autonomy and collaboration in new ways. Human patience and fairness became a model. Their ability to act decisively while remaining ethical was something that few civilizations had encountered. As the days passed, the Council became more introspective. They started reviewing past decisions, analyzing how humans had been treated historically, and realizing that the patterns of disrespect had accumulated over time. Every insult, every forced restriction, every dismissive gesture had contributed to the humans' current stance. The Council members began to see that they had created a situation in which humans could no longer engage on the Council's terms. By underestimating the humans, they had set themselves up for this quiet but profound consequence. Humans, however, did not celebrate this realization. They did not send messages of triumph or satisfaction. They continued to work with allies, helping civilizations navigate trade, security, and resource management. They showed that leadership did not require domination. They displayed a model of influence that relied on trust, collaboration, and integrity. Their actions quietly demonstrated that true power often lay in patience, planning, and ethical conduct rather than in force or intimidation. The Council now faced pressure from multiple directions. Some member species demanded reconciliation with humans, warning that ignoring the situation could destabilize large sectors of the galaxy. Others still clung to the hope that the humans would return without the Council needing to make concessions. But the Council could no longer ignore the humans' influence. Trade routes were shifting, alliances were forming independently, and smaller civilizations were actively seeking guidance from humans. The Council's authority, once taken for granted, was now under scrutiny. Amid this quiet tension, the humans made strategic moves. They strengthened contact with planets that were previously neutral, building connections based on fairness, mutual respect, and practical cooperation. They shared knowledge, helped establish infrastructure, and offered guidance on governance and trade. Humans acted as mentors, allies, and partners, not rulers or aggressors. Their reputation grew steadily, reinforcing the idea that they could be trusted to act wisely and fairly, even when others were not. The Council finally recognized that their previous approach had failed. They had underestimated the humans' patience, intelligence, and principle-driven decision-making. They had believed that ultimatums would control humans, but in reality, it had only highlighted their misjudgment. The humans had acted with precision, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Walking away had been their message, and it was clear to everyone observing that this act alone carried more influence than any Council decree could. As the galaxy watched, it became evident that humans were changing the balance of power without confrontation or threat. Their approach was methodical, fair, and calculated, demonstrating a form of leadership that commanded respect naturally. Species across sectors began reconsidering their relationships with the Council, weighing whether aligning with humans might offer greater stability, fairness, and security. By the end of this period, the Council understood a truth they could no longer ignore. Humans were not just another species to negotiate with. They were a civilization guided by principle, capable of achieving influence quietly, and able to create trust that extended far beyond any formal authority. Their calm, deliberate approach had reshaped the galaxy without a single act of aggression. The Council now faced the reality that if they wanted humans at the table in the future, they would need to engage with respect, fairness, and honesty. Anything less would be ignored or rejected, as the humans had already demonstrated. In every system that had been touched by the humans' actions, there was a subtle but powerful shift. Trust, cooperation, and stability became associated with humans, while the Council's authority was increasingly questioned. What had been intended as a negotiation tactic by the Council had transformed into a galaxy-wide lesson. Humans had shown that patience, principle, and steady leadership could accomplish far more than force, threats, or arrogance. Their quiet influence had changed the political landscape, reminding all civilizations that respect and fairness were as powerful as fleets or weapons. The Council's realization was complete. Misjudging humans had been a costly mistake. Their calm departure from the negotiation table, their strategic patience, and their ethical approach had altered interstellar dynamics. The galaxy had witnessed a demonstration of influence and leadership without conflict, proving that human strength lay not only in their capabilities, but in their wisdom, foresight, and unwavering principles. After several weeks of careful observation, the Galactic Council began to fully grasp the consequences of their miscalculation. What had seemed like a small act, the humans walking away from a negotiation, had grown into a galaxy-wide shift. Every report, every message from allied systems, and every new trade agreement reflected the humans' influence, spreading quietly but decisively. The Council realized that they were no longer the central authority they had believed themselves to be. Humans had created a new center of gravity in interstellar affairs, not through aggression, but through respect, fairness, and calm determination. Humans, meanwhile, continued their work with the same quiet focus. They did not seek to dominate or threaten anyone. Their fleets moved strategically, ensuring that their colonies were safe and that trade routes remained secure. Humans strengthened their communications, sharing information with trusted allies and offering guidance to civilizations seeking fair solutions to conflicts. Their approach was simple yet effective. Act ethically, plan carefully, and maintain patience. Every action reinforced their growing reputation as a reliable and principled force in the galaxy. The Council's unease grew daily. Delegates began receiving reports from planets that had long been loyal to the Council, but were now seeking guidance from humans instead. Smaller species, once intimidated by Council authority, began asking humans for advice on governance, trade, and security. Humans responded patiently, offering assistance without demanding loyalty or obedience. They taught methods for fair negotiation, shared technological knowledge when appropriate, and encouraged collaboration among independent civilizations. In doing so, they strengthened alliances and built trust, further expanding their influence without confrontation. Council members, who had previously been confident in their authority, now questioned every decision they had made. They had assumed humans could be pressured into compliance, but the humans' refusal to participate under unfair conditions had proven otherwise. Their calm and deliberate exit from the negotiation had been a message of strength, and it had forced the Council to recognize the humans' independence and wisdom. The Council began to realize that their power was not absolute. It was contingent on maintaining respect and cooperation with humans, a lesson they had learned too late. Meanwhile, humans continued to consolidate their position through subtle but effective diplomacy. They strengthened ties with neighboring systems, offering support for trade and infrastructure while respecting local autonomy. They helped mediate disputes where their advice was sought, demonstrating fairness and ethical leadership. Humans showed that influence could be achieved without coercion or intimidation. Their growing reputation as a principled and reliable civilization caused other species to reconsider their loyalties and alliances. Many realized that siding with humans could bring stability and long-term benefits. While ignoring them risked isolation or conflict, the Council attempted to respond to the humans' growing influence, but their efforts were limited. Attempts to negotiate or assert control were met with polite refusal or careful observation. Humans did not act impulsively, and they did not escalate tensions unnecessarily. Their patience and strategic thinking allowed them to maintain control over their own actions while observing the Council's moves. The Council's missteps became more apparent with every passing day, and their credibility among smaller species began to erode. Inside the Council chambers, debates grew tense. Some members advocated for immediate reconciliation, urging the Council to apologize or offer concessions to regain humanity's favor. Others feared that doing so would be seen as weakness, potentially encouraging humans to push further. Yet even those who resisted reconciliation understood the reality. The humans had created a position of influence that the Council could not ignore. Attempts to control or undermine them could backfire, while recognizing their strength required humility and strategic adaptation. Humans, however, remained focused on constructive engagement. They did not demand recognition or authority, nor did they flaunt their growing influence. Instead, they concentrated on building stable relationships and supporting allied civilizations. Their approach emphasized fairness, mutual benefit, and ethical conduct, demonstrating leadership through example rather than domination. Other species began to emulate these principles. Inspired by the humans' ability to combine patience, strategic thinking, and ethical action, the Council watched as humans quietly reshaped alliances and strengthened their networks. Systems that had once relied solely on Council guidance now sought input from human representatives. Trade agreements, security collaborations, and cooperative projects increasingly involved humans, often without any interference from the Council. The humans' influence spread not through force, but through respect and trust, showing that true power could be exercised with integrity rather than coercion. Council members, who had previously underestimated humans, began to acknowledge their misjudgment. They recognized that humans were patient, intelligent, and principled. The Council had treated them as if they were a lesser species that could be pressured or manipulated, but the humans' calm and deliberate actions had demonstrated otherwise. Their quiet withdrawal had not been a failure. It had been a calculated demonstration of autonomy and resolve. The Council now faced the challenge of adjusting their strategies and acknowledging the humans' authority in subtle yet meaningful ways. As the influence of humans expanded, smaller civilizations began to look to them for guidance on ethical governance, trade, and conflict resolution. Humans offered advice without imposing authority, fostering trust and collaboration. Their actions reinforced the idea that leadership and influence could be exercised through integrity, patience, and strategic thinking rather than through intimidation or force. This approach strengthened alliances and enhanced the humans' reputation across multiple sectors of the galaxy. By the end of this period, the Council had no choice but to acknowledge the humans' growing role. Their initial assumptions that humans could be controlled or pressured had proven completely wrong. The humans' calm, deliberate, and ethical approach had reshaped the balance of power without aggression, demonstrating that patience, principle, and intelligence could create influence stronger than force or authority. The galaxy had begun to shift. Trust and cooperation increasingly centered on humanity. Smaller species that had once feared or relied solely on the Council now sought guidance from humans. Humans had quietly, but decisively, established themselves as a stabilizing force across multiple sectors. Their influence was respected, their actions observed, and their principles admired. All of this had been accomplished not through dominance, but through steady, patient, and principled engagement. For the Council, the lesson was clear and unavoidable. Underestimating humans had been a costly mistake. Their calm withdrawal, strategic patience, and ethical leadership had demonstrated a form of power and influence that few civilizations had ever seen. Attempts to assert control or pressure humans further would not succeed. The humans had proven that their autonomy, principles, and strategic foresight were inviolable. The Council now faced a new reality, one in which humans were not merely another species at the negotiation table. They were a force that had quietly reshaped the galaxy through patience, wisdom, and integrity. After weeks of careful observation and quiet planning, the Galactic Council realized that they could no longer ignore the humans. Their influence had grown steadily, not through threats, not through power, and not through coercion, but through patience, principle, and steady action. The humans had walked away from the negotiation table without a word of anger. Yet that simple act had caused ripples across star systems that could not be contained. Now, the Council knew they had to respond if they wanted to restore stability or even regain any sense of authority. The Council called an emergency session, gathering delegates from all member species. The atmosphere was tense. Many members were uneasy, worried that any misstep might provoke humans to further assert their influence in ways that could bypass the Council entirely. Others were frustrated, unwilling to admit that a single civilization had quietly outmaneuvered them through patience and integrity. Despite differing opinions, one thing was clear. The humans were no longer just another species to be negotiated with. They were a force that demanded respect. Humans, meanwhile, remained calm. Their colonies continued operating smoothly. Trade routes functioned without disruption, and the allied species maintained steady communication. Humans did not send aggressive demands or ultimatums. They did not attempt to dominate the Council or make public declarations of power. Instead, they continued to act with quiet efficiency, observing the Council and other species while maintaining fairness in all dealings. Every move they made reinforced the idea that their strength was rooted in wisdom, patience, and principle, not in fear or force. The Council's delegates debated endlessly. Some suggested sending envoys to apologize for the previous treaty and to request renewed negotiations. Others argued that humility would be perceived as weakness and that the Council must demonstrate authority. Amid these debates, it became clear that the humans had shifted the balance of power not by force, but by demonstrating a level of patience and integrity that few civilizations had ever seen. Any attempt to assert control over them would likely backfire, creating greater instability than the Council had already caused. Meanwhile, humans quietly strengthened alliances. They sent envoys to systems that had previously been neutral, offering guidance on trade, security, and governance. These actions were not aggressive or intrusive. They were deliberate, fair, and cooperative. Many civilizations began to see humans as a stabilizing force. Unlike the Council, which had relied on authority and fear, humans relied on trust and reliability. Species that had once been dependent on the Council's directives now sought advice and partnership from humans. Recognizing their wisdom and fairness, the Council began to understand the gravity of their mistake. For decades, they had assumed that humans could be pressured or manipulated. They had treated them as if they were a lesser species, one that could be controlled through decrees, restrictions, and ultimatums. But the humans had proven otherwise. They had acted with patience, observing, calculating, and taking deliberate steps that had allowed them to build influence without aggression. Their quiet departure from the Council chamber had been far more effective than any speech, threat, or demand. Across multiple star systems, humans' influence continued to grow. Trade routes shifted subtly to favor cooperation and fairness. Smaller civilizations, inspired by humans' actions, began adopting similar approaches to negotiation and conflict resolution. Humans became a model for principled leadership, showing that patience, ethical conduct, and careful planning could achieve results far more powerful than force. Their calm, deliberate approach reshaped alliances, encouraged cooperation, and strengthened trust among civilizations that had long been dependent on the Council's authority. The Council could no longer afford to ignore the humans. Delegates realized that they needed to engage with them respectfully if they wanted to restore any influence. Messages were carefully drafted, emphasizing humility, acknowledgement of past errors, and a desire for fair negotiation. The humans responded predictably, firmly, politely, and with clarity. They expressed willingness to engage in dialogue, but only under conditions of mutual respect. They made it clear that past insults and attempts to control them had consequences, and that the Council must recognize humanity's independence and principles. This exchange marked a turning point. The Council had hoped to regain authority by issuing ultimatums or pressing humans into compliance, but those tactics had already failed. Humans had proven that influence could be built through principle, patience, and strategic action rather than force. Their calm, deliberate behavior had created a network of alliances, respect, and trust that the Council could not easily challenge. Every species that interacted with humans began to see them as a stabilizing force, one whose judgment could be trusted and whose actions were guided by fairness and integrity. Humans, however, remained measured. They did not boast about their success or try to dominate the Council's attention. They acted with quiet dignity, focusing on solutions rather than confrontation. They worked with allies to strengthen trade, communication, and defense systems, ensuring that cooperation was efficient and fair. Every move reinforced their reputation as a civilization that could be trusted, respected, and followed not because of intimidation, but because of principle and clarity of purpose. The Council gradually began to adapt. Members who had once relied on authority and force realized that their strategies had been outdated. They began to listen, taking note of how humans built alliances and maintained stability without conflict. Slowly, they understood that respect, fairness, and ethical conduct could wield more influence than threats or ultimatums. The humans' example reshaped the Council's approach to diplomacy, trade, and interstellar negotiation. As the dialogue between humans and the Council continued, smaller civilizations observed closely. They saw that humans were not seeking power for its own sake, but were committed to fairness, ethical cooperation, and stability. Their calm, deliberate actions created a model for leadership that did not rely on fear or dominance. Many worlds chose to align themselves with humans voluntarily, not out of obligation, but because they respected the integrity and reliability of human decisions. By the end of this period, it was clear that the galaxy had changed. The humans' quiet withdrawal from the negotiation table had been a pivotal moment, reshaping interstellar relationships and the balance of influence. They had demonstrated that patience, principle, and ethical leadership could achieve more than aggression or coercion. Their actions proved that respect and trust were more powerful than authority or intimidation. The Council now faced a simple truth. Underestimating humans had been a costly mistake. Their calm, deliberate, and principled approach had shifted alliances, strengthened trust, and reshaped influence across multiple sectors. Attempts to impose authority, issue ultimatums, or control humans would not work. Any interaction with them required respect, fairness, and recognition of their independence. Humans had proven that strength was not measured by fleets, weapons, or decrees. It was measured by patience, wisdom, integrity, and the ability to act decisively without aggression. Their quiet withdrawal, strategic observation, and principled engagement had altered the political landscape of the galaxy. The Council finally understood that humans were not just another species at the table. They were a force of influence, capable of shaping alliances, stabilizing regions, and guiding civilizations through principle rather than power. In the end, the Council extended a formal invitation for renewed talks. The humans responded with a simple message. They would engage when the dialogue was respectful, transparent, and fair. It was a clear reminder that humans had set the terms for engagement, and the Council must now honor them. The message carried weight far beyond words. It reinforced the humans' reputation as a civilization that could not be underestimated, controlled, or ignored. The galaxy watched, aware that humanity's approach had set a new standard for diplomacy and influence. They had achieved remarkable results without aggression, without threats, and without disrespect. The lesson was clear. Patience, principle, and integrity could create power greater than any weapon, fleet, or decree. Humans had walked away from the council, but in doing so, they had reshaped the galaxy, proving that true strength came from calm confidence, deliberate action, and unwavering ethical conduct.